Hello, I'm Barbara Levin, the Executive Director of Neurofibromatosis Mid-Atlantic. Welcome to Genetic Testing Through a Lifetime. I want to thank you so much for joining us for this very exciting and informative program. We're very happy to be sponsoring this educational event. Because we have some folks joining us today who are hearing impaired, I have written down my opening remarks. We will provide a closed caption version as soon as possible. NF Mid-Atlantic is a nonprofit organization based in Baltimore. We've been around for 34 years, and we remain committed to our founding principles of supporting people with NF, their families, their caregivers, their circles, and anyone who has an interest in NF. We have embarked on a special effort this year to help combat the isolation that can occur when someone is facing an incurable disease, such as neurofibromatosis. A few quick items for our webinar. Our next webinar will be on September 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Help with Your Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. You can sign up at our website, www.nfmidatlantic.org. For those of you in the Baltimore, Washington area, we will be hosting a night in Florence on November 11th. It will be a wonderful evening of food, music, and socializing with others. Please visit our website for information and to RSVP. A few housekeeping items. On your right, you have a question pane. Simply type in your question and click Send. At the end of the presentation, we will do a Q&A session and take as many questions as we have time for. I will be muting everyone while Dr. Lewis speaks, but feel free to write your question. By tomorrow, I will be posting the complete presentation of our website for download, www.nfmidatlantic.org. It will also be on our YouTube channel, Great Gabby Dog. You can review all our archive videos there or on the homepage of our website. Ricki Lewis is a science writer with a PhD in genetics. She has published more than 3,000 articles and is the author of the textbook Human Genetics, Concepts and Applications, now in its 10th edition. A short book, Human Genetics, The Basics. She's co-author of 2 human anatomy and physiology textbooks and a novel and essay collection. The Forever Fix, Gene Therapy and the Boy Who Saved It, is narrative nonfiction and will be a documentary film. Dr. Lewis is a genetic counselor at CareNet Medical Group in Schenectady, New York, and teaches Genethics for the doctoral program of the Alden March Bioethics Institute of Albany Medical College. She guest blogs for Scientific American and has a new blog, DNA Science, at Public Library of Science. She is a hospice volunteer, frequent public speaker, and is active with the American Society of Human Genetics. Dr. Lewis's website is www.rickilewis.com, and she's at Ricki Lewis on Twitter. A personal endorsement of the Forever Fix. I read this book and was riveted and encourage everyone to get a copy. Now, I'm anxious as you are to hear Dr. Lewis, but before that time, I need to mention that NF Mid-Atlantic survives solely on your generosity. If you appreciate this educational program, please consider a donation in any amount. Go to www.nfmidatlantic.org. We've made donating very easy. Please indulge us one moment while I turn this webinar over to Dr. Ricki Lewis. Thank you again for joining us.
Hi, this is Ricki Lewis. Thank you for joining me today. Your genetic information is present from when you were a fertilized egg, and it will be there for several years, many years after you die. And for this reason, it's possible to do genetic testing at various different stages of the human experience. So today's lecture will be a sort of an overview of the different types of genetic tests that we can have. If you've taken a genetics course in school, then you may have seen a slide similar to this one. It shows the three what we call modes of inheritance, but I won't focus on this too much. The illustrated one shows autosomal recessive inheritance. Many rare diseases fit into this category. It is a situation where two carrier parents, they're healthy, have a child who has a disease, such as sickle cell disease, cystic fibrosis, or Tay-Sachs disease. Because of the laws of Mendelian inheritance, each of their children has a 1 in 4 chance of inheriting the two mutations. But on the left of the slide are the two other modes of inheritance. In autosomal dominant inheritance, which is neurofibromatosis, one parent has the condition and each offspring faces a 1 in 2 chance of inheriting the mutation. In X-linked recessive inheritance, the females are the carriers and the males are affected with predictable frequencies. Genes encode protein, that is what they do, and it's the protein that is responsible for whatever the particular trait is. So a gene encodes a protein that serves as a clotting factor. So if there's a mutation in that gene, then the person may have a bleeding type of a disorder. But most diseases that make most of us sick are not caused by errors in single genes, but rather they are the culmination of increased risk associated with inheriting several or many genes, as well as environmental influences, some of which, fortunately, are controllable. The types of genetic tests are summarized on this slide. And it may seem like a lot of information in one particular slide, but it's kind of a summary of the rest of the talk. The types range from the old to the new. The first type of genetic test is a classic one based on symptoms. A doctor or another health professional notices a certain collection of symptoms. It matches what they know about, say, cystic fibrosis. So a child who has failed to gain weight and has salty sweat, frequent respiratory infections might trigger a CF test years ago. Today it's tested for in newborns. Inborn errors of metabolism also show up at birth. We'll go over all of these in a little bit more detail in a minute. The single gene mutations are the ones I just mentioned on the past slide. Some genes just increase the susceptibility of getting a particular associated illness, and that leads to a great deal of misinformation. The BRCA1 and 2 breast and ovarian cancer genes, for example, will greatly increase the risk that a woman or a man may develop the breast cancer, but it's not 100%. And in fact, it depends sort of on your ethnic background what the risk actually is. And ApoE4 is an Alzheimer's susceptibility gene that I'll talk about in a minute. Up until a year or so ago, many genetic studies were called GWAS, a horrible acronym for a genome-wide association study. And these studies basically showed collections of genes that, if certain variants were present, may raise your risk of something. So it's very fuzzy data, and this type of technology has sort of been supplanted by direct genome sequencing. Repeats in the DNA sequence. You'll see on the right the DNA is a sequence of A, T, C, and G. Throughout the genome are scattered short repeats such as ACG, ACG, ACG. And the repeats themselves are kind of a language other than the genetic code itself. Measuring the repeats and comparing the number of repeats among individuals is the basis of a lot of the forensic testing that's done on DNA. The next two examples, whole exome sequencing and whole genome sequencing, are pretty much what's dominating the field of genetics right now. The exome is the part of the genome that tells cells how to make proteins. And it sounds a little crazy, but it's only 1% of the genome. The rest are the controls. So in order to really understand what's going on, we need to be doing whole genome sequencing. But in the meantime, the exome sequencing is done with chips, microarrays that have studded on them little pieces of DNA that correspond to all of the protein encoding parts of the genome. So they can provide a tremendous amount of information. Okay, my screen is frozen. Okay, here we go. A good example of the single gene versus the whole exome sequencing. An analogy I like to use is comparing Cliff Notes for, say, The Wizard of Oz to the entire book. So the exome is, for what we know now, the most important part. And it's done when a person cannot find a diagnosis. The little boy on the left is Corey Haas. My book about gene therapy is his story. He has Leber congenital amaurosis type 2. It's a form of hereditary blindness. At the time that he was tested, I think about 12 different forms of LCA were known, each one caused by a different gene. And Corey was lucky. He had one of the more common forms, and his genetic test result came back, you have this. And that's it's not wonderful, but it's at least wonderful to know what's wrong with you. Little Gavin on the right here is 3 years old. He had every test in the book to try to explain his blindness. He's been profoundly blind since birth. And finally, his entire exome was sequenced, and last November, the gene was identified. So I've written about him quite a bit. He's an incredible little kid. I met his parents, but I don't know him. And interestingly, because he can't see, he's developed this incredible musical talent where he can hear anything and sing it. So people with the blindness tend to develop their other senses to get along in the world. So these are two little boys I'm kind of close to who have benefited from genetic testing. So I would like to go through the times when tests. Hi. I just had a beep on my phone. Before conception, there's something called comprehensive carrier testing. There are tests now for nearly 500 recessive childhood diseases, and the goal here is to test people before they have children to find out if they are carriers for the same disease. And in that case, each child has a 1 in 4 chance of having the condition. The diseases that are tested for are highly penetrant. That's genetic jargon for if you have the mutation, it's a pretty good chance that you're going to have the associated sickness. Because for some genes, you can have a mutation, but for just sheer luck or the protective effect of a second gene, not actually have the sickness, and a false positive can be a difficult thing to live with. The comprehensive carrier testing is based on an organization that's been around since the 1980s called Dor Yeshurim. They are in the Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York, and for many years they've had a system that anonymously tests young people for the Jewish genetic diseases. And if two people planning to marry carry the same disease gene, they're told that they should find an alternative, such as adoption or not having children or finding different partners. And it sounds a little heartless, but it has worked fairly well. And as a direct result of Dor Yeshurim, Tay-Sachs is pretty much gone from the Ashkenazi Jewish community. So the comprehensive carrier testing is to try to intervene before people become parents. Another intervention a little bit later is something called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. And I know there's a lot of information being thrown at you here, but this technique, it was developed in 1989. It appears in the news every few years as if it's brand new, but it's not. If a couple is having in vitro fertilization, some of the fertilized eggs are allowed to divide twice so that they form an 8-celled embryo. And because of a quirk of mammalian development, one cell can be removed from an 8-cell embryo and tested. And if everything looks okay, the 7 remaining cells can be implanted in the uterus and they can go on to develop into a baby. If the embryo has the inherited disease, it can be discarded. Most parents donate such embryos for research or to develop stem cells. But again, this is not a little baby in a test tube. It is one cell that would be discarded or used for research. Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is used to generate what are called savior siblings. And the precedent here is in 1999 when a little girl named Molly Nash was dying of Fanconi anemia, and her parents conceived her little brother Adam to be a match, based on the immune system, a match that way, so she wouldn't reject his cord blood stem cells, and he also didn't have Fanconi anemia. So the conception and birth of Adam saved the life of Molly, and these people were given a lot of flack on the Today Show. I remember the episode, but nowadays it's done more often, and there was even a novel by Jodi Picoult about this whole idea of savior siblings. So the pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is increasingly being used with in vitro fertilization to select the embryos most likely to make it. This slide shows some familiar and unfamiliar techniques. Amniocentesis has been around for decades. Chorionic villi sampling is done a little bit earlier in pregnancy, about by 10 weeks. And that is a little bit more risky, but it's been around for a while too. What has never really been developed is fetal cell sorting. It's been possible to get fetal cells from the maternal circulation for many years, but the technique has never been inexpensive enough for it to be very widely adapted. And Part D, this is from one of my textbooks, shows a karyotype. This is the chart of human chromosomes. Back when I was in grad school, we had to take pictures and use an actual scissors and tape to make these charts, but now, of course, computers hooked up to microscopes just spit them out in an instant. Most exciting is a technology based on detecting fetal DNA in maternal blood, because it's not very invasive other than the prick to the woman's skin. The basis of the technology is that fetal DNA tends to be shorter than maternal DNA, so it can be size selected. And this can be used to look for inherited diseases. It can be used for chromosome conditions such as Down syndrome. It can be used to check paternity. And really important, it can be used to check for new mutations. With a new mutation, the fetus has a condition that didn't exist in either parent. This tends to happen, for example, in a form of dwarfism, where the parents will be of normal height, yet they give birth to an autosomal dominant child who has dwarfism because the mistake occurred in the sperm or the egg, not in the mother or the father. So this is a technology that will be coming down the line quite a bit. Newborn screening has been done for many decades with a very simple test called the Guthrie test. It is blood sampling from the heel of a newborn on usually the 3rd day after birth. An analytical chemistry technique called mass spectroscopy is used to analyze the molecules in the child's blood. So it's usually not DNA-based tests at this point because the mass spec is just simpler and cheaper. These tests detect inborn errors of metabolism, and the ones that are included tend to be the ones that we can treat. There's really like no point in knowing a horrible long-name disease if there isn't anything you can do about it. Newborn screening began with screening in the 1970s for phenylketonuria, that's PKU, which if untreated causes profound mental retardation, but if a special diet is started from birth, the child has a normal intellect. So there are several other conditions that can be treated this way as well. There are also some papers published about sequencing the entire exome of newborns or even fetuses, and this keeps my bioethics students very busy arguing back and forth. The photograph on the left shows that there's a movement of people who object to newborn screening, and to me they sound somewhat paranoid and think the government is out to do mysterious research on their child's DNA. The point of newborn screening is to save lives. That is it, and that's why it's done. There was an article in the New York Times from November 2008 called Born to Run, Little Ones Get Test for Sports Gene. And this exemplifies how I think some of the genetic tests are done for trivial reasons. This is a test based on one particular gene variant that seems to be more common in elite athletes, such as sprinters, than in people who don't have any athletic ability, such as myself. A company marketed this test, and the article was all about New York City parents who were using it to figure out whether their kids should play soccer or not. I start out my online course with because it really gets people talking. So I think that's a misuse of the technology. You should ask your kid what they want to play and subject them to a test, but that's just my opinion. Back in 2010, Berkeley, the University at Berkeley, wanted to test incoming freshmen for 3 particular traits: lactose intolerance, alcohol metabolism, and folic acid metabolism. It isn't really important what the tests are. They're pretty old tests, and they're very accurate. But the fact is that there was some coercion, subtle coercion involved, because the freshmen were made to feel that they had to participate. It was not done in a medical setting at all. Again, the New York Times covered this quite well. So because there was not really informed consent, there was a great deal of objection, and the program was halted really before it could get underway. I think it kind of set a dangerous precedent. But then again, my own students, and one of our weeks we go over these direct-to-consumer genetic testing companies. Some of them have elected to be tested just because they're curious. At all ages, DNA testing can provide information about ancestry, forensics, and evolution, so genetic tests transcend the healthcare orbit. The basis of these types of tests, is fairly simple, is that the more alike the DNA sequence is between individuals or groups, the more recently they shared a common ancestor. Dates can be assigned to these sorts of studies because mutations take time to accumulate, and for some genes, the mutation rates are known, so things can be extrapolated. Starting at the end, evolution studies I think are particularly fascinating, and comparing DNA sequences in fossilized material, for example, has shown that there are a certain percentage of genes from Neanderthals in European genomes today. And I blogged a few weeks ago about a contemporary of us and the Neanderthals called the Denisovans. Their DNA shows up in people from New Guinea and the Australian Aborigines today. So we can learn about the types of humans who came before we did by comparing DNA sequences. DNA is also used in forensics, where the repeats are looked at to compare individuals. And back in 1988, I wrote the cover story for Discover magazine about the first rape conviction based on these repeat DNA tests. It was a technology developed in the United Kingdom. Ancestry tests are particularly interesting. I gave a lecture at Family Tree DNA several years ago where I met many groups of families who had undergone the genetic testing. And one story I wanted to tell, because to me it was one of the most moving examples of a misuse of genetic testing. There was a family who the younger people in the family had elected to have these ancestry tests just to make sure they were all related the way they thought they were. The leader of the group was a 96-year-old man, and his genetic testing revealed that he was not related to anybody else. So the elders, other than him, got together, and they decided never to tell him because his entire identity was built on the family that he was raised in. And what the people told me was that at many times and in many places, when a little baby is left from war or famine or disease without parents, another family will take the child in and never tell him or her that they're not the biological parents. So there are many, many cases of such unofficial adoptions, and DNA testing can reveal it. So in this case, it was thought that this man was much better off not knowing that, because he would have thought he'd lived a lie. So that was an example of how you have to apply logic and compassion to genetic testing as well as just looking at the results. Okay, switching gears a great deal. There are several companies that do direct-to-consumer genetic testing. Several of them have fallen by the wayside or been merged into other companies, but the one that has persisted is called 23andMe. It's a wonderful, wonderful website with all sorts of information, and it's state by state. In New York State, where I am, you're not allowed to take their tests, but in some other states they are, and there's a process in place now that maybe FDA will approve their testing. Some of the traits are trivial, such as eye color, whether you can taste bitterness in broccoli or not, and whether you have sticky, wet, or dry earwax. So these are what I consider somewhat trivial traits, especially the eye color when you can look in the mirror. But 23andMe has also done tests for a lot of really common disorders. And this is important because these are generally not single gene diseases, and the only way to figure out which genes contribute to these diseases is to look at a lot of people. And 23andMe has a built-in huge client base, and in fact, with all of their databases, they were able to identify a new gene behind Parkinson's disease in about 9 months. It was work that might have taken regular grant-funded research maybe a decade to do. So 23andMe sort of started out as the bad guys. I remember when they were introduced, and a different company was introduced at the annual genetics meetings, back about 8 years ago, maybe not that long ago. But they kind of had to prove that they're really quite valuable after all, and they've done wonders for educating the public about genetics. Moving on in the lifespan, Alzheimer's disease. There's a gene called apolipoprotein E4, and if you have one copy of a mutation in this gene, it means you have a threefold increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. If you've got two mutations, that means one mutation in each copy of the gene, you have a 15-fold increase in risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So the big question is, would you want to know? Most people I've spoken to say they would want to know, but I would never want to know if this was in my future, because every time I misplaced my cell phone, I would think it was a symptom, and I don't want to live that way. But you know, it is a choice whether you're tested or not. I think these numbers are fuzzy. Quite enough isn't really known about the connection as yet. And plus, there are some imaging technologies coming along that will provide complementary information that may actually be more important. Moving on to the end of the lifespan, probably the most important people in genetic testing are those who've lived past their 100th birthdays, the centenarians. And there's a study going on at Tufts University on these people and on some other places as well. And they're important because they've made it. They've done something right, and they've been healthy, and it would help all of us to know what they've done right. So far, researchers have identified single genes that are very important in aging. And as you might expect, these involve immunity, glucose metabolism, the cell cycle, which has to do with cancer, lipid metabolism, response to stress, and antioxidants. And so far, it's been found that what the oldest olds share is never having smoked and never having had heart disease. Interestingly, lots of them have had cancer, which I thought was really good news, having had cancer myself, because it means that an awful lot of people live with and survive cancer. People live past 100 with cancer. My grandfather lived to 103, and he had cancer, so it can happen. Finally, genetic testing can be done long after you're dead, and that leads to filling in some holes in history, such as whether Jesse James's body in his grave was really Jesse James, which I believe it actually was. The Romanov family is perhaps one of the most famous examples of DNA testing that helped to identify the people in the graves by comparing them to modern-day relatives. There was a special type of mutation in the mitochondrial DNA in the Romanov family, and that's how the assignments were made. Another famous case was Thomas Jefferson, his eldest son, Easton, being the offspring of the slave Sally Hemings. That was confirmed with DNA testing on the telltale Y chromosome, and that led to some wonderful books and films, and also the extended family gets together once a year to celebrate their heritage. And the final slide, that's a URL for kind of a silly but not so silly fictional account I wrote for the Scientific American blog early in the summer about what it would be like if genome sequencing was required by law at some point early in our lives or even before birth, and then that information was used to track our lives for years, just sort of like in the film Gattaca. So that's something I want to kind of get everybody thinking about. Would having such a technology be an invasion of privacy? Would it be an opportunity for people to harm us? Or would it be something that would help us anticipate health problems and perhaps take care of them before they surface? So I think that's, let's see, one more slide just as a shameless plug for all of my books. The textbook in the lower right corner is very expensive because it's a textbook. I wrote the little book above it because it's extremely inexpensive and has essentially the same information without the real pretty pictures. It's very conceptual and highly readable. It's not a textbook at all. It's just basic genetics. And then, of course, is the Forever Fix, the story about the little boy in one of the early slides who was cured of his blindness with gene therapy. It's a pretty amazing story. The little boy, 4 days after the gene therapy, was at the Philadelphia Zoo, and he looked up at the sky because the other kids were screaming about a hot air balloon, and he screamed because it was the first time he'd ever seen the sun. And that's how the book begins. So I think that's the end, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricki. That was wonderful. I learned a lot. We do have questions, and I encourage any of our attendees at this point to write more in your question pane on the right-hand side. but in the meantime, indulge me for a second. You had mentioned about your basic text, human genetics, the basics, not costing as much. Do you have a bit of a price?
Oh, you can find them all on Amazon, and I think
all right.
the human genetics one is it's somewhere between $16 and $20.
Eminently affordable.
It's very up to date. The textbook is about $140 something. I have nothing to do with those prices on Amazon. And the Forever Fix on Amazon, it's about $16, but the paperback's coming out January 8th, and that will be a lot cheaper.
Congratulations.
And you can get anything on a Kindle or an iPad or whatever.
Of course. Well, let me go to the questions. Some of them came early, and you may have answered some of these questions, but let me ask anyway. We have a question asking, can genetic testing be done without results shared privately and without information in medical records and without insurance companies knowing about the rest of the results, the test or the results?
That's a really excellent question. I'm not an authority on insurance, but I do know, and I think it was with the early days of the breast cancer test, patients would come in and take it under a different name so that it wouldn't go into their medical records. That was one way around it. With the 23andMe, my student who she took her BRCA1 test through 23andMe because it was a lot cheaper than taking it through the company that sells the test. And she used an assumed name. She made up a name because she didn't want it getting out. But you're not supposed to be penalized for that anymore. There's been a lot of legislation in the past year or so that, has been protecting people. So, yeah, I'm not an authority on that, though.
No, that's very good. You anticipated a next question. Someone was asking about the cost of genetic testing.
It varies by test. It can be really expensive. The costs are going to go down, but for now, I know if you get the entire BRCA1 and 2 genes sequenced, it's about $3,400. It's from Myriad Genetics. This is the company that's patented the gene, and it's been in the news constantly for as long as I can remember, fighting back and forth over whether they can patent it or not. It is $3,400 for the entire sequence. They work with you to get insurance to cover it. And if you've got a strong family history of certain cancers appearing at a young age, insurance mostly will cover this test. You can take short versions of the BRCA test that look for just the most common mutations. What my student did was she took the test from 23andMe, and I believe it was only about $99 because it's not a medical test if you take it from 23andMe. It's considered educational and informational. But my student took the results from 23andMe, and then she spoke to a genetic counselor that she paid for, and she did a whole bunch of research and found out that the exact test was pretty much the same as the one from Myriad Genetics. The one from 23andMe was not a total gene sequence. It was just looking for the common mutation, but my student knew which mutation her mother had, so she was able to get that specific test for less. But prices will be coming down. And you can do things, some companies will sell like a Jewish genetic disease panel, which I think now has 19 diseases on it. So the prices vary, and they are coming down. And you can find some of them online. For example, hereditary hemochromatosis is a fairly common single gene disorder, and you can just Google that, and there's an organization that you can do testing through that. But you do need a genetic counselor to interpret results. For the hereditary hemochromatosis, for example, I think it's about 90% of the people with the mutations don't ever actually get sick. So that can happen. So you need a genetic counselor to tell you about the specific illness and what the test results mean.
Great. Thank you. I am trying to go through our questions. We have a lot. During the excuse me, I'm not very good at this. During the
PGD.
Oh, thank you. Testing. You said that one cell is taken out and tested. What is the percentage that one of the other 7 cells contains the mutation that you are testing for?
Excellent question. It depends on the disease that you're looking at. This is normally done when there's a disease in the family. So with Fanconi anemia, it's autosomal recessive, I hope. I think that's what it is. I don't remember exactly. But in that case, they knew, because both parents are carriers, and they knew that because their little girl was sick. So each embryo they conceived would have a 1 in 4 chance. So the embryos, it was a 1 in 4 chance of being completely without the mutation, a 1 in 4 chance of having the disease, and a 2 in 4, or 1 in 2, chance of being a carrier like the parent. Mm-hmm. So the family of the little girl were able to choose this little boy who developed into Adam because he didn't have the disease, and he matched the cell surfaces of his sister, so his umbilical cord blood was able to save his life. If it's an autosomal dominant condition, the chance would be 1 in 2.
Interesting. Thank you. Another question has come in. Hi, Ricki. I feel like a talk show host. Our 2 children have been diagnosed with NF1. Both are doing well and have a few outward physical signs of the disorder. Neither me or my husband have signs of NF1, nor do we have a family history of NF1. We are waiting on STREM #1 genetic testing, I don't know if I said that correctly, for our 15-year-old son, and our near 20-year-old daughter may be tested based on her results. How often have you seen these odds, as the geneticist said, the odds of 2 spontaneous NF1 mutations are 1 in 9 million?
I would agree with that. That's pretty incredible. Wow. I would take it they're not twins. And I suspect that you or your husband actually has a case that could be so mild that it could be a little brown spot on your back or something. I'm sure you've been tested extensively, but I would suspect one of you has got it, and it could be a case of non-penetrance, where just by sheer luck someone's got the mutation but they don't have the phenotype. It does happen, and I don't know how common that. Well, you just said 1 in 9 million. I would believe that makes sense. It is wise to get the other children tested as well. You know, if it was just the one child, I'd say sure, that's a new mutation, but this may be an excellent family for exome sequencing. It's possible that they don't even have NF. It could be some totally newly discovered gene.
Thank you. Another question. What is your thinking relative to rare variants and variants of uncertain significance? Some who just provide measurements may not be able to provide interpretation. We have a wonderful audience. They're much smarter than I am. But did you get that question?
Yes, I did. And actually, my graduate student, the one who had the testing for the BRCA1 gene through 23andMe, she did her thesis on this, the variants of uncertain significance. It's really, really scary. It's something that's been around actually for a long time. You have a practitioner say to you, oh, your genetic test results came up abnormal, but we don't know what it means. And then you're supposed to live with that. So this is something that's been happening more and more as we learn more about the genome. There are a lot of variants of every gene. It's an informational type of a problem. And there are going to be lots of things that don't have any meaning. And knowing those are there can cause really undue stress. This has been around for a while because a friend of mine whose child, a little boy, he's now a senior in high school, I think, many years ago, called me up when they were pregnant because they came back with an abnormal amnio result. So it's not just the new technology. The abnormal amnio result showed that it was a boy and there was something wrong with the Y chromosome, that a section of the Y chromosome had been inverted. So my first reaction was to tell my friend, the father, that he needs to check his Y chromosome, because if his is inverted, then the little boy got it from him and it wouldn't be a problem. And it turned out that the father's Y chromosome was normal. So then what I did was I scanned the literature, this was before computers, and tried to find if anyone had been reported with an inversion similar to where the little boy's inversion was, and I couldn't find anything. So they took their chances and they went ahead with the pregnancy, and the boy is fine except for that he's got an inverted Y chromosome. And it's possible that he'll have an infertility problem down the line if that inversion interrupted a fertility gene. But, you know, they kind of took their chances and were really, really nervous for a long time about this genetic finding. And all I could think at the time was if they didn't know, they wouldn't have worried. But, you know, if you can get the information, many people want to get it. So, yeah, that was a really great question. Variants of uncertain significance happen with breast cancer testing as well, and I don't think I would ever want to go through that. People could elect something like a prophylactic mastectomy when they're not even sure that the variant causes the disease. And the terminology is extremely confusing. Mutation means genetic change, but it sort of has a negative connotation, whereas variant is the nicer word for a genetic change where we don't know if it does anything bad. So it is really confusing. Good question.
I think we have time for one more question, and it is one of our listeners says, hello, I have 3 cafe au lait spots and not 6, but I have had 2 tumors removed from nerves, and I have all the other symptoms, but they are not sure that I have any form, I assume, of NF. I don't have the 6 cafe au lait spots. Do you have to have 6 or more to have this?
Okay, you need to ask a physician that. I'm not qualified to give a clinical diagnosis, but this is reminding me a great deal of osteogenesis imperfecta, this question and the question about the couple with the 2 children, and that is there could be another gene causing the same symptoms as NF1 and NF2. With osteogenesis imperfecta, it's a genetic disease where the bones break very easily, and in fact, fetuses are born with broken bones. And in the past, parents have been accused of child abuse because one child will have repeated fractures, or they'll have 2 or 3 children with the fractures. They arrest the parents usually and make them take a test for osteogenesis imperfecta. So for a while, there was only one gene that was known. So if parents failed that genetic test, if that genetic test showed that they didn't have OI, they would be prosecuted. And then a second gene was discovered. So if parents didn't have either of those mutations, they would be prosecuted or at least accused. Now we're up to 5 genes known to cause osteogenesis imperfecta. So I suspect there's some other condition that hasn't been discovered yet. The good news for patients is that if this is your situation, perhaps you can get involved in a research study so you don't have to pay for anything, which would be helping humanity and helping yourself. But if you heard the genetic news from last week about the genome sequencing, I stayed away from that because it's not really news. It's a progress report. People are sequencing different parts of the genome, and new genes will be discovered over the next 10 or 20 years. So my thoughts are that there's something else out there that looks like NF, but you still need the physician to make the diagnosis of it.
Thank you. Now, I said that was our last question, but we did get one short question in, and Dr. Lewis, this may not be a question for you as much as something that I may be able to report on, but I'm going to ask it to you. Someone wants to know, does NF cause balance issues as well?
I have no idea. I'll leave that to
yes.
you.
and that's where I would like to report that
okay.
That is one of the more, and we are not physicians here. We just collect information, give support, provide information sessions such as this, and provide vetted referrals. However, one of the most common symptoms that people do report to us are balance issues, particularly when tumors are in brains or near in ears. Certainly with NF2, balance is a particular issue. So, as I said, that would be our last question. I do think that some people, I want to ask you, Dr. Lewis, some people will have questions after the webinar. Would you mind if they send them to us and I would forward them to you?
Right, that's all. They can email me, whatever.
That is great. I thank you very, very much. This has been wonderful. I want to tell I want to thank all our attendees, and I certainly want to thank Dr. Ricki Lewis. I encourage you all to buy the Forever Fix. If you don't, go out and spend a lot of money on the textbook or a lot less money on Human Genetics, the Basics, and follow her blog. I also want to reiterate that this entire webinar, including slides, will be posted on our website as of tomorrow, www.nfmidatlantic.org, and it also can be found on YouTube. I thank you very much. I wish you all a good afternoon. I hope you will consider joining our next webinar, as I mentioned, on obsessive-compulsive disorder, and in October, a very NF-related webinar on optic gliomas. Dr. Lewis, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for a wonderful, wonderful webinar, and thank you all for your time. Feel free to visit our website and join us again. I am going to close out this webinar now, and I thank you all and have a good morning. Goodbye.
Bye.